Oh, well, hello. I didn't see you there. My name is Maddie Stellingworth. I'm 15 years old, and my favorite superhero is Wonder Woman. She's just such a strong representation of feminism, and she embodies the perfect female identity. Or does she? Today I'd like to share my findings and personal opinions on how women are being represented in comic books, why they're being represented this way based on the real world, and where this representation will go from here. Now, perhaps we should start from the beginning. And by the beginning, I mean why I'm so infatuated with comic books. Because girls don't like that kind of thing, right? It's not girly enough for society. Well, I didn't exactly know that for a while. In fact, when I was about 10, I remember going down to my grandparents' basement and reading my dad's old X-Men comic books. From there, a new love was born. I began asking for action figures and comic books of my own for the holidays. Now, because of this, I was labeled as a tomboy, which didn't exactly make sense to me because my name was Maddie, not Tom, and I didn't get how liking those things suddenly turned me into a boy. But as long as no one was taking away my action figures, I didn't really care. Fast forward to now, I'm still the same person I always was. I collect comic books and action figures alike, but I guess I hide it a little better. I go to PacSun and Forever 21 to buy clothes because that's just what girls do, right? Well, months ago I got assigned this huge project that you can do on absolutely anything. And I decided this would be the perfect opportunity to research why it's not expected of women to read these comic books and why women are shown the way they are in these comic books. So, now that you know my backstory, which is something every great superhero must have, let's begin to answer these questions, shall we? Let's start way back in the 1930s with the invention of the superhero comic book, a new frontier in entertainment, and breakthrough heroes like Captain Marvel and Superman were on the rise. However, much like the times, women weren't a huge focus in this industry. In fact, women were rarely featured, and when they were featured, they were merely used as damsels in distress, or what one could say the arm candy for the Supermen saving them. An example of this is Lois Lane and Superman. Unlike the new Man of Steel movies, Clark Kent and Lois Lane didn't really have a relationship. In fact, their relationship consisted of him saving her from her kidnappers, which happened to be his enemies. And then maybe after she'd give him a peck on the cheek and he'd fly away and continue being the awesome superhero that he no doubt is, but she would just kind of fade into the background. This provided another look on the theme of the time, which is men are the only people that are capable of independent success and being courageous, and women are just subordinate figures in the background. However, after the birth of male comic book heroes, it was about time that someone make an attempt at diversity. So DC Comics created a character that you're probably all familiar with, Wonder Woman. Now, much stir was caused because of her sudden arrival, but she was still described as someone who was, quote, beautiful as Aphrodite, wise as Athena, stronger than Hercules, and swifter than Mercury, unquote. With such flattering characteristics like that, it might lead one to think that she can escape the stereotypical woman role, and in turn lead to the downfall of stereotyping women as the weaker sex in this form of media. Sadly, not even the most super of women can help but be forced to be faced with excessive objectification and ridicule. An author named Michael Lavin actually wrote an essay on this exact problem, called The Objectification of Women in Graphic Novels. And a quote from that I'd like to share pertaining to this information is, powerful heroines like DC's Wonder Woman may easily overcome the most overwhelming threats and obstacles, but they are invariably depicted as alluring objects of desire wearing scantiest costumes, unquote. Now, the objectification of heroines like Wonder Woman was so bad at the time that a comic book historian named Ron Goulart even said that, quote, in the days before the advent of Playboy and Penthouse. Yes, you heard me right, Playboy. Comics offered one way to girl wash. Moving on now to the 1950s, all the sex and violence in comic books led to various complaints by parents and even ended up being linked to juvenile delinquency in young boys by a psychologist named Friedrich Wertham. As a result, Comic Code authorities set guidelines that seized the constant objectification of women in these stories. However, the silence of no female objectification did not end there. If it had, I probably wouldn't be making this video right now. In the 1960s, comics began re-emerging, and with the changes in times, this provided the perfect opportunity to portray women even more indecently. An example of this is a supervillain from the X-Men comic books named the White Queen. Now, Michael Laven, as stated before, wrote in his essay that, quote, "The White Queen is the stuff of male sexual fantasy, a push-up bustier, panties, and high-heeled boots, all in white," unquote. In fact, it took me quite a while to find a picture of the White Queen that wouldn't be flagged down by YouTube or offend most women who are watching this. And considering that men not only came up with this character, but also drew her this way, proves my theory perfectly. Men are drawing these women this way to please themselves. In fact, can you think of any discernibly average to maybe ugly looking women in comic books? Because I can't, but I can think of quite a few distinctive, not pleasant looking male comic book heroes. Deadpool, the Hulk, and the Thing. Just off the top of my head. Heck, even She-Hulk, who is Hulk's accomplice, is shown with a toned body, pleasant face, nice flowing hair. I guess she's just green. So now I hope I'm showing you that this media form is being used as yet another way to push unrealistic beauty standards onto women. And sadly, it's still used that way. Or is it? But right now, I'd like to take the time to point out someone who actively endorses the objectification of women as well as pushing unrealistic beauty standards onto women. And that man's name is Frank Miller. Brief summary on Frank Miller. He's a highly esteemed author of graphic novels like 300, Sin City, and Batman All-Stars. And even I have to admit, the guy writes a mean story. And he's a very prominent figure in the industry. However, being such a prominent figure in the industry, sometimes his sexist characters as well as very sexist remarks in his own life are often overlooked. Some examples of those are Ava Lord in Sin City constantly calling herself a slut to win her abusive lover back. Or Frank, yes, actually Frank the person, telling his artist Jim Lee to, quote, "Go with an ass shot. We can't take our eyes off of her, especially since she's got such a fine ass," unquote. Pretty inspirational, right? It kind of makes you wonder why we're not letting our little girls read this kind of stuff when men like this are writing it. But there's no way to tackle a hard question than with some good old statistics. These statistics compare the top 2 comic book distributors, DC and Marvel. Now, this shows the ratio for creators and editors and artists. And notice that, obviously, the male-to-female ratio is extremely high, as well as females are mostly assistant editors, and barely any have any creation in these characters or any drawing ability. So I just want this to prove my theory once again, that men are drawing women this way to please themselves, and women have absolutely no say in how. However, enough of me turning this into a complete crash course history lesson. Let's take a look at something a little bit more relevant for a bit. And by relevant, I mean the recent spur of comic to movie adaptations. Now, one that recently caught my eye was Suicide Squad. It came out a few months ago, and it had a character in it that many fans have been waiting to see on the screen for a very long time. And that character's name is Harley Quinn. She was a very prominent character, and she showed she could kick some serious butt. But I just want you to take a second. Do you think her attire was completely suitable for kicking said butt when Deadshot right next to her is wearing a full suit of armor? Just something to think about, how the women are wearing bikinis and the men are wearing full body suits and long trench coats. Another movie adaptation with a strong female lead that happened to be about superheroes are the best movies ever, Elektra and Catwoman. They both scored under 5 stars out of 10 on IMDb, and they were destined to be flops. literally from the beginning of filming. Even Halle Berry accepted her Razzie, which is basically an anti-Oscar, because she knew how bad the performance was. With the scripts and all going wrong, it basically just became an excuse to see Jennifer Garner in a latex skin-tight suit, as well as Halle Berry. Yikes. So why does it seem that not until 2016, with Wonder Woman's lead in Batman vs. Superman and Harley Quinn's lead in Suicide Squad, that women have been taken seriously in these films? And even now it's not perfect, which is something that I'm pretty sure is apparent. But right now I'd like to be a little more positive for the last few minutes of this video and talk about the more positive things happening in this industry in regards to women. And right now, the top thing is Marvel's new initiative to diversify their comics in their new comic book era. And it's actually working this time. About 2 years ago, Marvel Comics announced that they were going to diversify their comic books in order to create their next comic book era. But to do so, they needed to build off the old era's characters created. Some of the changes being made to characters include Thor is now a female, Captain America will be a black female, Iron Man will be a black female as well, but her name will be Ironheart, Captain Marvel will be a woman as well, along with Hawkeye and Wolverine. Of the 45 new covers revealed, 15 directly feature a female protagonist or person of color, which may still seem like an unfair ratio, but when you compare it to 1990, in which 35 covers were released and only 2 had a person of color or woman on them, I'd say this is a definite step in the right direction. Now, also in my opinion, and a few other experts on this topic, it would seem like reusing another character's background and just changing their ethnicity or gender is a bit opposed to the idea of diversity. And a better option may be to just create a diverse character that is all their own, has their own background, and is famous because of their diversity. But I'm not going to bash what Marvel's doing too much, because compared to what other comic book distributors are doing, this is a definite step in the right direction, and it keeps getting more and more diverse every day. So let's focus on some of these breakout superheroines in a bit more detail. I'm going to be going over Spider-Gwen, Captain Marvel, the A-Force, and Miss Marvel. First off, we have Spider-Gwen. Spider-Gwen is basically about if Peter Parker's girlfriend was bitten by the radioactive spider rather than himself. Spider-Gwen sold over 250,000 copies. That's a lot of copies for 2 years of being on the shelves. Not to mention, she's also dressed and drawn in a not demeaning fashion. Crazy, right? Above all, it shows that if Spider-Man didn't exist, I think Spider-Gwen could take care of us just fine. Next, we have Captain Marvel. Now, Captain Marvel is a reincarnation of the male Captain Marvel, but she has quite a few different things going for her this time. Like, this whole comic book is written by a female author named Kelly Sue DeConnick. That could be a reason why she is dressed not only in an awesome costume, but a costume that isn't particularly demeaning or objectifying. Also crazy. But this character has also been offered her own live-action movie coming out in 2019, starring Academy Award winner Brie Larson. That's awesome. Next we have the A-Force. The A-Force, in short, is basically about a bunch of superheroines that come together to fight crime. Not only is this comic written by 2 female authors, Margaret Bennett and G. Willow Wilson, but it also has some of the biggest superheroines in the business, including She-Hulk, Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, Storm, Black Widow, and so many more. Sadly, in October of 2016, this comic book was canceled due to poor sales. However, those who did read this, and critics that read this, were unanimous in the decision that it was an extremely feminist comic book and was a huge step in the right direction for women in these comic books. Next, we have Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel is about a Muslim American teenage girl who finds out that she has these incredible inhuman genes and uses those genes to fight the injustices in her life while growing up. Not only is this comic book awesome, and as you can see, her costume is also awesome, but it's written by one of those women who also wrote the A-Force, G. Willow Wilson. Not to mention, she's also Muslim American. A Muslim American woman writing a comic book that's been nominated for not one, not two, but 6 prestigious Eisner Awards, as well as being a New York Times bestseller. That's unheard of. So it's a great step in the right direction, and it shows that when women write these comic books and when they even have the opportunity to create these characters, it pays off in the long run and creates more characters for young girls to look up to. So, as I've shown you the shifts throughout time, it would seem that in recent times, women have been given more and more power in the creation and writing of these comic books, and in turn, female characters have become less and less sexist, which is something I think everyone would like. While it is not perfect, we're trying to get it there. We're trying to receive that equality. And one of the first steps in receiving that equality is to take away the stigma that only men and boys read these comic books. Because in fact, 46.60% of comic book readers are women. Once we wipe away that stigma, women won't be afraid to work in this industry, and we'll have more and more strong, powerful characters for young girls to look up to, like Miss Marvel, Spider-Gwen, and Captain Marvel. So I hope you've learned something new today, and take along this message. Don't be afraid to be who you are, and if what you like to do is read, write, or draw comics, and you're a female or a male, do it.